Hello, my name's Bruce Benton. I'm with the Department of Community Affairs, Small Cities CDBG program. I'd like to go over a couple things before we start. This will review the plan and SAGE instructions, also federal compliance items. Before I begin, I just want you to know that this program can be paused, played back. You could speed forward too, and will be available on for future review. All the material will be available at the web page you're familiar with. It's already been posted, and also at the end there is a code that you need to send back by email to the Small Cities program to confirm your attendance. Also at the end, you can send questions back to Small Cities and staff respond. Okay, so now we'll begin. Small Cities program this year is about the same amount of funding as last year. As you can see, 6.8 million. As also, you know that we've postponed the submittal several times now. Applications will be due now on October 23rd. Also, as you noticed maybe there, that the 108 loan program is back in force, and applications which are similar small cities projects will be available through the NJEDA, so you should contact them about that. Again, most of the time our required is the 3 national objectives of the program: benefit to low mod, elimination slums of blight, and urgent need. Most projects fall under the benefit to low mod because 70% of our funds must be used to benefit low mod. Elimination slums and blight is another category. Very seldom do we use urgent need. However, you probably hear a lot about urgent need now with the COVID emergency. We have state objectives. They're listed here and on the next page. Each fund that's set up, as you may have been aware of, are public facilities funds, housing rehabilitation fund, innovative development. These funds, the maximum you can receive for public facilities and innovative is 400,000. Housing is 400,000 if it's a multi-jurisdictional county program. But most of the time it's 200,000 maximum for municipalities. This year, I want to point out that the matching funds requirement has been reduced 5% now for 1 to 100 in the MRI rank. Then the next category and the next one, 10%. Then it goes up to 20%, then 25%. I want to point out that number of applications. An applicant can apply for 1 public facility grant or 1 innovative development grant, but you can also apply at the same time for a housing rehabilitation grant. But you can't apply for a public facility and an innovative development. One thing we look at when we review applications, open balances. So you must make sure that you don't have more than 50% balance remaining in a prior award. One of the most important parts of the application is the housing and community development needs statement. This statement is explained in the application instructions in SAGE, and it's up to the town or county to show us that this project is one of the most important projects currently needed in the community or county. A little bit more on innovative development. It is designed to work with nonprofits, and it's also unique in that it's a project other than public facilities or housing rehabilitation. And we encourage communities, counties to look at areas that are difficult to deal with, especially when in light of floodplain and hazards that need to be removed from the community. There are threshold requirements that we're going to look at when we're reviewing applications. So the applicant must meet several thresholds. Items. Again, with the municipal distress index, as you see at the bottom of the page here, applicants will receive points for that, depending on their distress. Some ways communities, counties can improve their scores are designing their program to impact more low, moderate income people, as you can see there at the top of the page. Also, balance ratios. Again, a 0 ratio will receive points. Ratios higher than 50.50 will receive no points. Okay. Readiness to proceed is another area that applicants can increase points by having bid-ready documents, or at least they need 5 housing rehab scope of works and clearance screening of at least 5 households by income level. Past performance is important. We also score that. You must address your deficiencies. Of up to 5 points will be awarded based on the ability to show that your project addresses a deficiency. Grant management is another important area. An emergency, if this project will address an emergency in the community, that will also receive points. There is a bonus points section for exceptional applications and applicants that address a problem and in a unique way. There are several eligible activities listed to help applicants in the CDBG program. As stated earlier, meeting one of the 3 national objectives is very important. We cannot fund a project if it doesn't meet a national objective. The second most important is being an eligible activity. So these activities are listed here. We may not be able to describe all of them, but these are generally the eligible activities. Also want to point out at the bottom of the page there is state and federal procurement requirements. Federal funds must assure that the grantee uses a competitive process in awarding contracts. All construction should be by a sealed bid process. Services, professional services, must be procured through a competitive process, and we're following the competitive contracting rules in the public contracts law. However, we removed the threshold. There is no threshold. All funds must go through this process. So this process requires first the town to pass a resolution using competitive contracting. If they've done it before and have a passed resolution, that could be used. A copy of the notice requesting proposals, a copy of the request for the actual proposal, and a copy of the if when after a review process a recommendation to award, and a copy of the notice in a paper telling the public that it was awarded. There's also further instructions in Sage, and also I'll go over where that this documentation can be uploaded into the application. We're also requesting communities and counties to report any funds that they recaptured in prior awards. This is mainly in housing rehab, and towns, they're encouraged to capitalize a revolving loan fund to address emergency situations and to continue to assist residents with preserving low and moderate income housing in their neighborhoods. We would not be too concerned if there is, say, upwards of 50 to almost 100,000 in these accounts, but anything over that amount is going to raise issues. These funds should be expended as issues are presented to the town to address. So we'll require a statement. We also do not want to award projects that would cause a displacement of persons. So we want to avoid that. But there are remedies to that, and there's relocation assistance possible, but that will have to come out of the grant. We hope to make awards November into December, maybe a little later this year because of these delays. Again, I want to point out that the program is flexible and that the Small Cities program may have funds later in the year that come available, and any project that was ranked well but was not high enough to get an award may receive award later in the year. So we will contact the applicant later in the year and inform them. And it's up to them if they want to go ahead with a project or maybe wait for another round. Attachment A is an important part of the final plan. Attachment A basically is a sheet with the checklist with all the threshold items identified so that we can thoroughly go through the application and make sure it meets threshold requirements. So you can use this as you go through looking at your project to make sure you meet these threshold requirements. I'm going to go on to the next page, which discusses the rating and which would lead to the ranking of the application. So as we discussed a little bit in the body of the final plan, we look at the MRI, that's Municipal Revitalization Index. It's a scale of distress in the community, and we would look at that. So communities with high distress get higher points, which happen to be the communities with the low MRI number will get higher points. Again, the need statement, very important. That's what we're looking at. And judging if this meets a need in the community. Program impact, number of people low mod benefiting gets high points. Balance ratio, again, a high balance is going to cause the loss of points. However, if you have a low balance or no balance, you'll receive points. Readiness to proceed is another area. that towns can get points in if they have at least minimum 5 housing rehab work write-ups and bid documents that could be in draft form, but they're ready to go. Past performance, again, we're looking at that, get a score on past performance. If you don't have any past performance, then you get the maximum or the middle of the area in points. Again, you get points for meeting the deficiency, grant management, how that has worked, and if the project is going to address an emergency. We also have bonus points if it's an interesting project. It works out to be somewhat unique, or is just an exceptional, well-documented application. Basically for us, easy to review. So the next screen is the list of the eligible communities in the program and their MRI rank. Okay, next we're going to move on to the SAGE instructions. These instructions, as with the plan, are in SAGE at the top of the screen on the upper right side. So while you're building your applications, you can click on them and review them. Or you can also find them on the department, the Small Cities Programs webpage. So to get started, you have to first initiate the application. It's always good to have your agency information updated. To initiate the application, you go in, log in to SAGE, and you open the drop-down menu up in the upper right-hand corner. Look for Small Cities, and click on that, and then you would then start your grant. When you do get into the grant and you load in your community or county's agency information, it's populated for you. Once you're in it, it's kind of an awkward way to start. As you can see, the numbers here presented. You start on the left side in the middle first, entering your contacts, and then you enter components, and then you go to application information, basically a short description of the project. And then you have application forms, which deal with the target population, low mod number of people. Housing rehab versus public facilities are different. The left side is for public facilities, and the right side is for housing. And then 5, you work at the budget at the bottom. And here is the start with the contacts. And then here is, assigning you have two areas. You have your agency contacts, and then you have the ability to add consultants. The components make it simple, but you'll see the Small Cities program only has a few components: public facilities, housing rehab, innovative development. They are the components that you start with. So it is rather simple, straightforward to start with. Then you would go in and do program types. You'll have to enter what type of community you are. So the service areas, counties, state. So you start with county, and then you go to a list, and then you pick your community. So as you work through it, remember to save, but when you build the other areas, the objectives, limit them to few objectives. Make it simple on yourself. It might be your objective is to, if you're renovating a senior center, you say that, and then your other objective is make this open for additional seniors or for seniors to have better access. Um, keep it brief and more focused. Don't elaborate. Don't think that you need to add more and more objectives. That's not what we're looking at, but we do need to know at least one or two objectives. Scope of services, I wouldn't get into too detail. We have models in the application that you can use, and you should look at those. Then we move on to the top application forms, as I said, with the target population. Here's the part on it. It's very simple in a way. You just use the drop-down arrows, pick your national objective, and then pick your activity. It's best if you can narrow the activity. Don't always pick a 03 for public facility. Try to describe it in more detail. If it's a public facility, make sure that you pick what it is. If it's street improvements, then click 03K for street improvements. But general overall 03 should only be used if there is no other more detailed description available. These are the low mod numbers. You want to check the type of low mod benefit, census, survey, or a limited clientele. In the case of a senior population, you're going to be limited clientele, and your project's going to benefit all seniors. So that would be 100% benefit to seniors in your community. If you pick slums and blight, it's not a low mod project. It's elimination of slums and blight. And there's two types of blight that you're dealing with, and that's spot or an area-wide basis. Matching funds is an important area. As you know, the percentages were reduced, but in this view, matching funds, you entered here. As you can see, the instructions were not updated. Whenever there's a contradiction between the plan and the instructions, the plan always overrides any other guidelines or instructions. Again, here's the documentation of needs and costs. That is where you enter a deficiency documented by a person qualified in the field and an estimate done by someone qualified in the field. Community development needs statement, as we discussed earlier, very important. This is going to discuss at least several areas, community development areas in the town, and will point out that the project will address at least one of those areas and is deemed by the community as an important project. Again, status of planning should be considered, and in your plans for your community, the project funded its relationship to the town's overall or county overall plans. Grant management, again, that's important. As you can see, things are very complex to manage, so you want to have a good management staff, and there's always a project coordinator that can be a employee of the town. It can be a consultant. There's always a director that oversees the project coordinator. However, the project coordinator is the responsible person with the day-to-day operations of the project. And that's what everyone goes to at the town, and that's the liaison with the Small Cities Program. More on the grant management, you can load it in there. We do require a resolution to be passed so that it's adhered to. Public hearing information, I'm going to go over this more in the federal compliance items, but a public hearing information that the first hearing is held 20 days, at least 20 days before the application submitted. The notice for the public hearing is published in the newspaper as a display ad. It can also be published now with COVID on the community's web page. So this documentation should be provided in Sage, and there are various places to load it up here and in the attachment section. So here's the attachment section. So you'll see that I know this is small, but the actual instructions, you'll be able to read it better, but it's a whole list of items with your a map of your area. It would be the various items that we just discussed. There's also a section to provide other sources of funds. We want to know if this is leveraging other sources. It's beyond, you know, you can put your match in there, but it's beyond the match. Then there's certification sheets. These are your typical grant items that you need to upload. There's some questions you need to answer in the beginning here. And then these are for nonprofits. Generally government, it doesn't apply. However, a nonprofit can apply, but if a nonprofit's working with the community, and they're going to be part of it through a cooperative agreement. The attachments here relate to the debarment, anti-lobbying, and a resolution to pass by the governing body to sign an agreement with the department. The wording for that model resolution must be adhered to, and you really can't change that. Of course, you can modify it slightly for your description of your project, and maybe if you want to add its unique activity, you can, but keep it brief. Okay, in the back there happens to be a appendix which it helps for several items. Here it's goes on to the certification and helps with the budget areas. What is accepted for engineering and architectural services, grant management, housing rehabilitation, the programmatic cost for case management. Here's a breakdown of the hours estimated for these items, which helps develop a budget. Again, when I mentioned about the budget, make it as simple as possible. If you are constructing, say, a senior center, and it includes various subcontractors, it's best just to make the construction one budget line item, and the various bills that you receive would be taken out of that construction line item. However, if the community has procured a engineer through a competitive process, and they want the program to fund the engineer up to a maximum of 12% of the grant award, then that could be a separate budget item, and that would be the appropriate way to list that. When we discuss the procurement items, these are the instructions of where to upload them in Sage, and down here it's actually the 2 lines available to put them in here. You may also want to upload the if there was a nonprofit that's working with the community or county, you can upload a draft, or if you have a cooperative agreement at this location. Here's the submission requirements. Due to now new technology, and of course with COVID, we want to limit paper submittals. 1 paper submittal is fine, we'll accept that, but anything submitted should be in electronic format and uploaded into Sage. If for some reason you can't do it, we'll accept it, but it's best to be able to have it electronically that could be emailed to us later. And this goes through how you would submit the application. You can always, after you submit, get a PDF copy. You can also get a PDF copy at the time you're making the submittal. In this area of the grant, you'll see that. Again, here's the appendix, which gives a lot of pointers on meeting the national objective. They're right here again. The different ways to document low mod benefit. The census data and how to conduct a survey. The web page also has the instructions for carrying out a survey. Housing programs, they must follow the U.S. HUD's income limits by county throughout the state, and it's based on household size. It's updated often, but it's about every year, and I believe it was updated this past spring. There's a little bit on slums and blight, and then here are the model scopes of services that you could upload if you wish. Again, don't overdo the scope of services models or the descriptions. You could just use these and just fill in the blanks, and that would be sufficient. Don't waste time on that. So, and then here's some more about the submission requirements. All right, now I'm going to go on to the PowerPoint for federal compliances. All right, we're going to cover in this section the major federal compliance items: citizen participation, fair housing procurement, competitive contracting, environmental review, and labor standards. So with citizen participation, you have to adopt a plan. We have a model on the website. Again, 2 public hearings, one 20 days before you submit it, a second one midway through the project. They always must have a 7-day notice, at least 7 days. Don't make it too tight where the day it's open and the day that it closes. Make sure that you cover the 7-day period and respond to any comments you get from posting your notice in a quick manner. The hearing should be held where it's open to the public during convenient times and handicap accessible. Also, the teleconferencing is acceptable so long as there's a 2-way communication. Fair housing and civil rights. We're going to address mostly fair housing in this slide. Later in the bid area, bid documents will discuss other requirements for minority business enterprises and minority women-owned businesses, and Section 3 participants, which are low income. So in this part, fair housing, there's 4 major components. One is to pass a resolution agreeing to 4 items: appoint a fair housing officer, contact HUD and New Jersey Department of Law and Public Safety, and ask for information and identify the housing officer. Implement a local fair housing counseling program that can refer to enforcement agencies, and publish a public notice. It's not a display ad, but a public notice in the local newspaper, or you could paste it in addition on the webpage of the municipality, and also post in the municipal building or county building a notice that announcing the all the above. All right, on to the procurement information requirements. Sealed bids for construction, competitive contracting for professional services. There's the site in the public contracts law. Again, there's no threshold. It requires at first a resolution of the governing body, but if it's already been conducted in the town, then it can use a previous resolution. It's only a one-time thing. What's unique about competitive contracting is that it's public. There must have a notice for requesting proposals 20 days prior to the date of submission of the proposal. And in going through this process allows the municipality to sign a contract with the proposer for 5 years. Other methods, which aren't as competitive, do not allow a period of that long. Again, this is for full and free competition. Information about the process, about how the inside information should not be conveyed to a vendor. However, you can provide how the proposals will be evaluated. That's important. And again, everything is evaluated and ranked through a methodology, and cost must be a factor in the evaluation. It's not the sole one, and it doesn't have to be the final one, but it has to be as part. So it's part of a score, overall score. And then once the proposals are received, prepare a report evaluating the proposal and a recommendation. And this has got to be done 40 hours before making the award. And awards should occur within 60 days of receipt of the proposal. Again, these items, there's several places. We discussed this in the final plan. It's also in the SAGE instructions, but there's places where you can upload this, and this is the copies that will be needed. At the bottom, we've come up with a solution to communities and counties that are having difficulty getting more than one proposal. So if you go through this process and you only get one proposal, and the proposal is sufficient to proceed with, but it doesn't appear to be competitive, if you have your grantee's attorney write an opinion that confirms that the process complied with competitive contracting and there was no conflict of interest and it did not violate state law, then they could proceed with the award. So this has been developed. We're also using this with COVID. So again, we want to avoid conflict of interest. There is a process if there's a potential that you can request a waiver, but that has to go through a process. We have it in our handbook. I'm not going to go into detail right here, but it requires a public hearing and a disclosure before the public. So, you know, that could be difficult for a community to go through. So you want to avoid that. You don't want to have to go through that. Again, it applies to any employee, agent, consultant, officer, or elected official of the grantee, and any person who exercises any functions or responsibilities with respect to the activity, or have an interest in any CDBG contract, consultant, or agreement, either for themselves or for a family member or business, are covered by this. Okay, now we move on to environmental review. There are several levels of review. There's exempt project, category exclusion, not subject to other laws, category exclusion subject to other laws, and then category exclusions where laws are triggered. There's environmental assessment and an environmental impact statement. Most small cities projects are in the category exclusion area. Occasionally we go to environmental assessment. Very seldom do we have an environmental impact, almost never. Exempt projects are exempt, but we don't fund a lot of the listed exempt projects. So it's mainly in the category exclusion area and sometimes environmental assessments. So exempt, it's pretty much a study or report or management, inspections, you know, purchase of insurance, anything that's a disaster related and you're going to rehabilitate and the structure or facility back to what it was before the disaster, then it would be an exempt project. There's an exception for that. And then again, there's a list of category exclusions that could also qualify exempt. If you find that your project is exempt, you must document it in writing and provide that to the small cities program grant manager for evaluation, and the program will make a final decision and approve it, and it will send you a notice. But there is no further review required after you do that because it's exempt. All right, category exclusions. Again, there's 3 types. Again, it's different levels. It depends on the project. So it may not trigger any laws. It may be subject to other laws, but compliance isn't necessary. And then it may be subject to other laws and the review by an agency such like wetlands or endangered species, or more commonly, the Historic Preservation Office. So in the case, you see the timeline here. They tell if it's triggering a compliance with another law, you must do a notice of intent and request for release of funds, along with your document, your environmental review document, and submit it to post the notice. And then after you post the notice and waited 7 days, submit it to the small cities program requesting release of funds. And the small cities then has to wait 15 days before we can issue a release of funds. Most of the time, what we're looking at with a category exclusion, which is allowed, it's never changing the size or capacity of more than 20%. That 20% is important right there. Special projects for the handicap, you know, it could be exempt, but if it's changing the footprint, then it would be. So a change in land use, say a warehouse to residential, that would trigger a category exclusion. If you have rehab where the estimated cost of the rehab is less than 75% of the total estimate of the cost of replacement, then you wouldn't trigger a category exclusion review. But if you go over that, then you're going to have to do environmental assessment. So what you're looking at, facilities improvements are in place and will not change size or capacity by more than 20%. Okay, these laws that are triggered: historic preservation, floodplain management, wetlands, coastal management, sole source aquifers. Also, we must address environmental justice, okay? So if this is not triggered, doesn't trigger anything, then no notice is required nor release of funds. And you just have to do a statutory checklist. But if you do, then we have to do the notices. Okay, again, you have to complete a statutory checklist, publish a notice, wait 10 days, mailing 10 days, and submit release of funds statement to the small cities and wait 15. We want you to complete the ERR using the model format on the web page. That's part 1. So with part 1 will cover category exclusions, and then part 2 would be environmental assessment. Sometimes to come across tiering. Tiering is when you're going to do a housing rehab program, but you do not know the addresses of the houses that you're going to work on. So what you do, you submit it to us, you do a category exclusion, which is subject to other laws. And if you've sent an inquiry, a letter describing your project to SHPO, and they don't know what houses you're going to renovate, they may require you to submit houses that you intend to rehab while you're moving along, and they're going to want to review them, each one of them, before you can renovate them. So that would be a trigger under category exclusion, which would require the notices. And however, if SHPO sends you a letter back and says none of the whole entire neighborhood that you plan to work in, or maybe even the whole entire town, they may say there is no impact, and they'll give you that in writing. But you can't, if you send a list of houses to SHPO and they look at all those lists and tell you that there is no impact, you must adhere to that list. You cannot change it. If you add a new house, then you're going to have to send that new house to SHPO for review. And they won't probably say that in your notice. So if that's the case, it could lead to that you have to do the notices for a category exclusion subject to other laws which are triggered. So in that case, you have to do all the notices too. All right, floodplain management is a little more, even if it's category exclusion, you must do an early notice and you must do an 8-step review process and then a final notice. The final notice is an explanation of the project location, because what you're doing in the early notice is telling the public that, hey, we're going to do something in the floodplain. And then the 8-step review process is evaluating that process, that location. And if there is a process that you could maybe relocate it out of the floodplain, if you can't, then you say so in your 8-step review process. And then the final notice will tell the public this is where it's going to be located. We have a model early notice. We have the an 8-step review process that you can follow and file with in the record. And the final notice model is in the handbook. So again, if you were in a coastal barrier system, that would trigger further environmental review. And runway clear zones, try to avoid that. But you could do housing renovation, but it would involve maybe noise issues, and you may have to insulate the house thoroughly and put different types of windows in there to reduce noise. So environmental assessments, all that other categories would be exceeded. Here's the 20% capacity or size. That's going to trigger environmental assessment. All right. So again, you have to, I said earlier, you have to complete part 1 and part 2. You have to do the statutory checklist sheet, which is in part 1, same as the category exclusion, but you also must complete an assessment worksheet, which is longer and it's more thorough. And again, make sure you address all those items. If you submit it to us and it's blank, then it looks as though that there is an issue. So again, you have the early and the final notice and the 8-step review process. If it's in a floodplain, that would be part of environmental assessment. In the environmental assessment, you have to be able to make a finding of no significant impact. If you can't make a finding of no significant impact, then you might have to do an impact statement. You also have to do another notice of intent request for release of funds. So you can combine them. If your project's also in the floodplain, the final notice can be combined with these two. That's also permitted. So it saves 15 days. If you have to mail the items also to affected agencies, planning commissions or what have you, then you have to allow at least 18 days for them to receive the mail. When you have the whole environmental review together with your notices, all your notices, your 8-step review, all that, that's when you're ready to submit it to small cities and for us to review. And we have to review, but also wait 15 days to receive comments. If everything's in compliance after 15 days, then we can issue a release of funds statement. Again, impact statements, as you can see, are very large. It could be not represented here, but if it's a hazardous waste site that your facility is going to impact, or if it's near it within, check the regs. I think if it's within 1,000 feet of a hazardous waste site, you really can't put funds into a project that close, and there are guidelines. But they're very large projects, and we do not fund the scale of these projects. So some here, advice, use the ERR models that are in the handbook. A good description of your project is important. Include whatever you need to describe your project well. And again, work with your grant manager, submit drafts for review and comments prior to publishing your notice so you don't waste time. Maybe you don't need to publish a notice, and our staff can help you with that so that you don't waste time and do extra work. All right, a little bit on lead safety, which is, we'll try to get through this quickly here. Again, any house, single family home, it could be rental apartments. We do not renovate apartments, but it could be through an innovative development project. We do sometimes help child care facilities So that does come into play. So any house built before 1978 is most likely has lead paint in the house or could have had lead-based paint. There's levels of renovations that cause another layer of control, $5,000 and less. You can use lead-safe work practices. A screening or risk assessment is optional, but it's sometimes good to have one. Between 5,000 and 25,000, you're only required to do interim controls and these lead-safe work practices. Again, screening or risk assessment is optional, but recommended, especially if you notice peeling paint or issues. Over 25,000 triggers abatement, and all the safety measures in the prior two levels. And a screening or risk assessment is required because that's how they're going to identify what lead surfaces have to be removed. So, and then all units must have a clearance test after the renovations are complete. It's important to start your risk assessment or lead evaluation as soon as the applicant is eligible, and you should hire a good lead evaluation contractor. A list of contractors is on the DCA web page. And then use this risk assessment to develop your rehab scope. What you don't want to have is a door on the second floor of the house that is lead and it's rubbing, and you're only replacing windows, and it's not over 25,000. And after you have repaired the windows, replaced the windows, and cleaned up, and even you're ready for a clearance test, but that door that's rubbing on the second floor is causing lead dust, and people are tracking it down into the, say, the first story where the windows were replaced. And when you do your clearance test, it triggers an exceedance because of that door. So the risk assessment would have looked through the whole house and figured that that door is a problem, and they're not going to get a clearance unless it's addressed. So it's best to do the thorough assessment of the house before you get into the scope of work. Okay, all the renovation rehabilitation work must be performed by an EPA certified renovator, right here. And then the employees that are performing the work under the certified renovator must have had lead safe work practices training, and their certifications must be in the project files. They're actually photo IDs, and same thing with the renovator. Again, the renovator must contain the work area and minimize dust and clean up thoroughly. And then the clearance test is conducted after the renovation is complete and the area is properly cleaned. And the copies of this are important, and they should be given to the homeowner. When you start a project, make sure that the homeowner has received the pamphlet and disclosure about lead-based paint in their home. This is important. It's a requirement. The lead evaluation contractor conducts a risk assessment, a clearance test, and also consults with them on the renovation work, and their certifications must be in the file. You might need a maintenance plan for a house that has a lot of lead surfaces in there. And because you didn't trigger 25,000 or more in the renovation, you're not going to abate those systems in the house. So this is for the homeowner, which may be doing work on their own after this project was completed. And it saves them and their family and their children from being exposed to lead dust and lead poisoning. So that's important too. Lead abatement contractors are required for work that exceeds 25,000, and a list of these contractors DCA webpage. I think NJDEP also has it too, but the department's webpage is, I think, better. Again, EPA certified renovator, the only one that can rehabilitate a house with lead-based paint. Okay, go over that again, renovator, and timing of the clearance is important, and the documentation for lead-based and the safety measure must be saved for at least 3 years. Okay, now we move on to labor standards. Most important part of labor standards is the wage determinations. They're both state and federal. Payroll certified, employee interview forms. We have to make sure our posters are on the job site. The labor standards officer is appointed as part of the grant management plan, and they are the reviewer, and they approve the payrolls, which are weekly. It's best that this officer would create a table so they can monitor everything from the table. What you do, you list, you work with the contractors, they tell you the classification of the workmen and what their hourly and their fringe benefit pay is, and you put it in the table and then compare them to the wage determination for both the state and the federal, which both list the wages and the fringe for each of the state and federal. From this table, then you can easily tell if the work persons are paid at least the minimum prevailing wage. They can always be paid more. So there's handbooks that we urge everyone to follow. There are the Davis-Bacon guidebooks also, and to contact your program manager. So if you monitor closely from the beginning, you'll avoid problems, severe problems in the end. So it's important. We were talking earlier about putting the wage decisions in the bid documents. These are necessary. HUD looks at this. Okay. The effectiveness of the federal wage decision is 10 days prior to bid opening. And if the contract is awarded within 90 days, everything is okay. But if it exceeds 90 days, then you're going to have to get a new federal wage decision, and it would be on the date of the award. The state determinations are the ones in effect on the date of the award, and we must verify the contractor eligibility. So we need to know the status of the contractor and their subcontractors, and we're going to check their names with a debarment list. The way to do this under federal debarment check, we need to check SAM. That's called System for Awards Management. Here's that bid checklist I talked about. You can see all these items should be in there, 1 through 15. And we want the bidder to initial this and then sign down here that they understand these things. Again, refer to the handbook on the Small Cities webpage, and further information can be sent to you from the grant manager for your project. HUD 4010, a very important form. There's the contractor guide to Davis-Bacon. There's a poster, DBA is Davis-Bacon Act. They're also in Spanish and English. Again, federal wage determination must be in the bid. Here's the website. State prevailing wages must be in the bid also, even though an award hasn't been made, and it would be the one when the award is made. You should get the most recent one so that they can, you know, give you a good proposal and estimate. The bidder has to acknowledge that they have to pay the highest of the two prevailing wages. A lot of times, contractors are familiar with the state program, but they're not familiar with the federal. And it just happens to be that the state usually pays higher wages than the federal government, but there's always maybe one or two job classifications that pay higher than the state, and they get tripped up. There's a payroll form that must, because it's a federally funded, they must complete this. However, because they're in New Jersey, they're going to have to do the state one too. So they end up doing two types of forms. So we have instructions also go along with these things. They're on the website. The HUD form for interview forms is HUD 11, and we have instructions for that. We have in our handbook a checklist for contractors. Now, what I talked earlier about equal rights, civil rights, minority business enterprise report, which gives consideration of projects for minority contractors and women-owned businesses, and Section 3 report, which is a form that used to comply with Section 3 requirements that low and moderate income businesses, usually they're smaller businesses, get an opportunity to become part of the construction project. There's also a requirement that a contractor that is awarded the contract also provide opportunities for people in the community that are considered Section 3 residents to have an opportunity in any hiring. So you have to make sure that they're aware of that. And they can tell us if they're hiring people that they gave that consideration. And then throughout the project, the labor standards officer can ask the contractor periodically, please tell me if you hired anybody new and were they low and moderate income, and please enter them on the form. And, you know, this could be part of a simple way to check by sending them an email and having them respond to you. And if they do have one, then they have to fill the form out and put the numbers in there. Again, SAM's registration is important. Any contractor working, we need this in order to check for debarment in the federal system. And HUD wants to make sure that we've checked for debarment. They're going to monitor us. They're going to monitor your project, and this should be in the file. So that's important. Now, there's a way of registering in SAM's that it's reviewed by the public. So the registration should be completed such that it provides a public statement of the registration of the contractor. Okay. This is what a wage decision looks like on the federal side. This shows a bricklayer, the rate, the fringe, and the total. So once this is effective at 10 days prior to the bid opening and the contract is signed within 90 days of the bid opening, then this wage decision would be the one to use throughout the project, no matter how long the project takes. Now the state is different. Again, this is the wage decision at the time that the contract was awarded. However, if you look at the top here, there are different dates where the wages change. So if in this case, this was retrieved in June 1, and by July 1, there was a slight increase, $1 per hour. The contractor, after on July 1st and after, must pay the workman in this classification, an operating engineer, another $1 per hour wage. And then if the project's still going on, which I hope not, but in July or January of 2017, they would have to pay an additional $1 plus over this amount. So this takes a lot of monitoring and careful review. Here's an example of a payroll. There's several ways you can do that. This is the overtime line up here. See overtime. This is standard. This is what we're mainly looking at. Very seldom do our projects go into overtime, but it does happen. So overtime is only if a workman is working on a project site, working all week, and normally over 40 hours a week would trigger an overtime rate. However, there are some classifications, and it will be noticed in that wage decision, if they get paid an overtime rate if they exceed 8 hours in one day. So they could have time and a half. Now, when they charge overtime, time and a half, the fringe rate is not increased by 1.5. It's only the wage. The fringe is still the same. In this case, you can see we separated the fringe here from the wage. So the total wage here, including a wage and fringe, the total wages is $43.77 an hour. Okay, so this is showing different ways it can be listed on this payroll. In this case over here, this guy is getting total cash, but we broke this out this way, but it's not necessary. You could also show it this way here. This form is a PDF and it's active, and you can enter the information and save it. So it makes it convenient. You can enter all this information, you can enter all this, you can put all this, and you're just changing the days of the week. Here's the numbers and the days. So these different examples down here is if they're paid to the fringes are paid to a plan, you must get from the contractor the name and address and a contact person of the plan, and he must provide you, this is when you first start, how that plan payment on behalf of that employee is paid, the elements of the house, it breaks down for different items. They should total the 1702 as required in this scenario. So long as all that is paid to a plan, and you don't have to check it every week, and you're just checking then just the wages here. Okay. So in some cases, the employer can't pay. They weren't they didn't do a lot of government work, and this is how they pay their employees. They pay them only $12 for fringes. So what happens is then they're paid, this is their wage, this is what they're paying now, but that doesn't make it. It would be in violation. However, they're saying, okay, well, we're going to pay, in this case, I'm sorry, they're paying part of the fringe $12 cash and $5 to the plan. So in this case, this might be wrong. This should be 5, and this should be either added into this, or you could just put down 5 and then put on the back page here. over in this area, an exception and the explanation, and this is allowed here in C. Okay. So see that how complicated it is, all right? But so you have different scenarios here you can examine, but scrutinize this one carefully because they're paying $5 to the plan, and that's allowed so long as you know the hourly wage and the fringe when combined equals the prevailing rate. You're okay. And then there is instances where you can always pay more to the wage to make up for loss on the fringe side, but there are instances where you can pay more on the fringe now and reduce the actual wage amount. That is possible, but just be careful when you ask them if they're paying to a plan. What are those charges to the plan? Do they actually add up to the fringes required? And you at least need to get that in a statement from the plan administrator when you begin. Okay, and then it's done. You're out. You're complete. You can move on. All right, so that's important. Here's a close-up of that. Helps you. And then here's the back side where you have to sign. The contractor signs here. All this is done for each week. All right. So in the case where there's no work done, you can write or type in up here, no work this week. And all this will be completed, but everything here, you might have all the guys' names here and even their titles, but all this information in here, in each line, will be 0 or just blank. And if it says no work week up here, then we have record of it. And you insert this right in all the other payrolls. And they're all numbered up here, right? So that's a good way to just record that they weren't there. And this is, our projects are small. Sometime a contractor comes out, he sets the site up, he does demolition, he clears it, he maybe removes the asphalt, and then they're digging up the street. So the contractor that did that type of work, he's not going to come back until the pipes are laid in the infrastructure before he starts, you know, the paving and the filling of the areas. So that contractor, he may come and work for 2 weeks, and then he's gone for, it could be actually a month before he comes back. So each week during that month, we have no work week. Here's the employee interview form. Just make sure that it's signed by the employee and the interviewer, and the dates are okay, and the amount of the pay that we're verifying. Make sure that that is correct. They know the amount that they should be getting. It'll be right in here. All right. This is important. A lot of times the workmen, they don't know that because it's a government project, they're supposed to get a premium. So this is filled out wrong a lot of the time. So make sure that that is clear to them. And when you do interview them, they know what they get paid on that rate or that day when they're on this project, because they might work on a private construction job and they're not required to pay prevailing wages. These are common problems. Wrong wage decision. They don't pay the higher of the two prevailing wages. Not only is it that sometimes the wages are higher than the other, but the regulations are different. This falls in place with apprentices to journeymen. So when there's an apprentice on the site, the feds require more journeyman per apprentice than the state does. This is another one, correct job title. The guys are working on the site, they may have an issue that one guy might say, I do mostly, I operate a backhoe. I am not a laborer. And so that might have come out during the interview. So you want to make sure that the right classification by the name of the employee. And you sometimes trace it by, could be the last 4 digits of the Social Security or part of that. It doesn't even have to be 4, but some way to track the employee, the name, and a number is always good. Again, here you go. Some employees perform different duties. So they might be a laborer and a backhoe operator. So when they're doing backhoe work, they get paid the backhoe rate and fringe benefits. When they do laborer job, they get paid the laborer's rate and the laborer's fringe benefit. So they may be on that payroll form in 1 week. They're probably in there twice, right? So you have to check that. Employee interviews, you only need to check 10% of the jobs on the site. Okay, and then you're looking on when you monitor the job site, you want to make sure they have the poster. And best to deal with this, take a photo of it, put it in the file. You can even email it to your grant manager for the record. Say, hey, I just was out there monitoring today. Everything looks good. Here's the poster. And the wage decisions must be posted on the job site too, usually on a trailer on the job site, or if they move around doing, say, sidewalk improvements, it can be posted on the truck. Maybe they put a stand out while they're working, whatever works. And you can take a picture of that and show it. Here's the ratio of apprentice to journeyman. Federal regulations require more journeymen. Okay, files disorganized. Create a table. Help you review the PRs. And again, should have all both the state and federal wage rates. It's great to enter the pages from the wage determinations on the form. So if there is an issue, you can, especially monitoring, you can go right to pull out your wage decision and find that wage rate immediately rather than paging through. A lot of times it's difficult because of the terminology and the regions that the wage decision covers. So these wage decisions are usually done by county. Again, some common problems, not numbered consecutively. Check all the boxes, especially fringe benefits. Fringe benefits paid to a plan. This is what you need in order to check for that. And do it up front, get it out of the way. Work with the contractor. Contractors are always easier to work with when you first start the job, and then towards the end, things can get become difficult. Again, if fringe benefits are paid, how are they? And if they check both boxes, you got to explain it. Okay, that means then they're paying maybe some of the fringe benefits to the employee in cash, and some of it's going to a plan. They need to explain that. So both boxes are checked and there's no explanation, that's going to be a problem. And again, they got to equal the highest prevailing combined wages and fringe. And you have to look at state versus feds. Again, here's the part about no work was performed. So you got to record that, because we're going to be looking for that payroll for that week. If you don't have any record of, they weren't there because they didn't have to be, but there should be a record. Again, the payrolls have to be signed. A lot of times people forget to sign them. And the 2-page certifications, there's the front and the back. And again, you need the employee interviews. So again, here, you monitor closely from the beginning, you will avoid most big problems. Okay, here's that code I talked about in the beginning that you need to record. And also, this is how we'll verify that you attended. And any questions, please send your questions by email and put in the subject area questions, Small Cities Program, in the subject line, and email it to this address. This address is also on our webpage.